All right, welcome to Copyright for Educators, March 19th of 2012. We're just going to run through a little Prezi here, probably keep it to about 15 minutes, and wrap her up by about 3:35. So copyright for educators, it's one of those topics that can be confusing, and you'll see why it's probably confusing as we go through. And so just kind of for my purposes and your purposes, this is just for information. This is not any legal advice, anything that you can take to court and say that I said that it's okay. And so just for information. A couple terms that we need to really take a look at as we go and dive into copyright is public domain, fair use, and intellectual property. And so if we were to define what the public domain means, it means that it's not subject to copyright, something that is readily available to available to the public to use, to distribute without any copyright whatsoever. And so things such as forms from the government, a lot of things from the basically anything from the government is public, in the public domain. Classical works are in the public domain. We're going to talk about that here in a little bit. Also, the word fair use, something that's usually thrown around in education a lot, is, well, it's fair use, I can use it. And so the legal definition basically is of fair use is one-time use for educational purposes. And really there's no percentages or number of words or length of time that is attached to fair use. So you can say, well, I only used 10%, I only used 200 words. The legal definition does not have any of that in there. And then as we get in through terms here, intellectual property is something that's really being debated right now, and a hot topic right now is because it's basically your ideas, your inventions, your writings, anything that is yours, that comes from you. And really those ideas and things can be bought and sold. And intellectual property is intangible, meaning it's not attached to anything. It's not a book, it's not a written down, so to speak, put out there somewhere, published. And so it's a hot topic right now, whether or not where that falls in copyright law. And so before we get into public domain, I think the first thing that we need to look at is fair use and some guidelines for fair use. And what we need to know is that it does extend to your students' work, and so as your students are creating things, they fall under fair use for educational purposes as well. But we need to look at a couple things and ask ourselves a couple questions as we're going through some of the things that are using some of the things that we're going to be using in our classroom. Is number one, what's the purpose of the use? What's the nature of the work? How much of the work are you using? And what is the effect of the use on the market? And so let's dive into each one of these here real quickly. And so the purpose. What is the reason you're using this? Is it for educational purposes or scholarship use? If so, then it falls under fair use. If you're going to sell it as your own, then it is not, obviously falls under fair use. And so a good example of the purpose of what you're using is a teacher shows the movie Shrek as a reward for his or her class. Does this fall under fair use? And most people would say, well, that happens all the time. Well, it does happen all the time, but it is not fair use, rightfully because of this reason. The definition of fair use is for educational or scholarship use. Is your showing of Shrek as a reward for educational purposes or scholarship use? And that answer is no, you're using it as a reward. Now, you can show it if you get your public showing, your license to show things in public, that such things as what movie theaters and things have to go through. And so you're showing that video in public, not for educational use, not fair use. What is the nature of the work? as we continue on with this guidelines for fair use is it factual? Is it creative work? In both cases, you should always give credit, no matter which one it is. But a lot of times you're going to see a difference of maybe giving credit or how you give credit. And so an example is a teacher outlines a chapter from a book, put in a PowerPoint, uses their textbook, and creates a PowerPoint. Does this fall under fair use? And the answer to that one is yes, that does fall under fair use, because it is factual information, using it for educational purposes. You're not affecting the market, and as we go through the other things, you can really answer those questions. Now, all these questions obviously are open to interpretation, and so make sure as you go along, the best advice I can give you is to either ask for permission or give credit where credit is due. And so we have purpose. What's the purpose of it? Is it for educational use? Is it factual or creative work? And the amount. Now, this is where things get a little hairy a little bit, is that the amount of the work, really the law says, does not signify how much is too much. Some people say that if you look through these on the internet for answers to this question, some say the rule of thumb is 10%, less than 400 words, or less than 30 seconds. But really, you should caution against using that, because there is substantiality, meaning if you're using a work and the work that you're using contains the bulk of that information, bulk in quotation marks, you have infringed upon copyright. Meaning, if I could take a poem and maybe only take 10% of that poem, but the 10% accounts for the bulk of information in that poem, then I have really infringed upon that copyright. I've taken the most of it. Another example is a social studies teacher records one episode of a PBS documentary, shows it in class. He or she uses that clip over a series of years. Is that fair use? And this is where things get a little gray, because the answer to this question is yes and no. This teacher has violated copyright, but has not. And where this teacher has not is the recording of one episode. Maybe he's watching a TV one night and says, wow, that'd be great to show my class. That's great. Fine, you can do that. However, you cannot do it for a series of years, because you should have gone out and bought that video. And so therefore you have affected the market for that video, because you would have or should have bought that video. And so the yes to fair use is you can record TV shows or shows off the television. The problem is you should not be using them for a number of years, unless obviously the person who has is the holder of that copyright of that show allows for you to do so. Next question you should ask yourself in fair use is, does it negatively affect the market of the product? Does it take away sales? And if it does, then you cannot use it. For example, a teacher is watching a movie in his class, his or her class, and the last 30 minutes they don't get to. And so teacher records that, posts it on their website. Last 30 minutes, post it on the website. Is it fair use? And that answer is that is not fair use. Because it really is you're affecting the market. You're watching the last 30 minutes. And so it's no different than walking into a movie, recording that movie, posting it online. Obviously, you're pirating movies or pirating songs. That all fits into that. So if you're affecting the market, copying whole workbooks and giving those to your kids year after year, you're affecting the market. You are infringing upon copyright. Now, there are some misunderstandings. Any use that seems fair is fair use. That is the answer. That is no. Just because you think it's fair doesn't mean it's fair. If it's not fair use, it's copyright infringement, which is false as well. If it's copyrighted, it can't be fair use. No, you just ask for permission. Acknowledgement of the source makes it use fair. Not necessarily. You should always ask for permission. Non-commercial use is fair use, not exactly. The lack of a copyright notice means that the work is in public domain. No, it does not, and we're going to go through public domain here in a second. It's okay to quote up to 400 words. No. I remember using substantiality, the bulk of the information. And you can deny fair use by including a disclaimer, and that answer is no. So, fair use guidelines, you should go through those questions. Purpose, yeah, we'll go back through them here at the end. But as we take a look at what's in the public domain, the public domain is basically whose works whose intellectual property rights have been expired, forfeited, or inapplicable. What does that mean? You may use works that are in the public domain without permission. And so if things are in the public domain, a person has created something, puts it in the public domain, you can use it without their permission. If you have a classical work, you can use it. And we're going to go through what is in the public domain here in a second. And so the question of, well, why is public domain so confusing? Well, here's the answer. Because you have all of these things. If it's before 1923, after 1923, but before 1977, but before 1963. And so you have all these things that need to go through whether or not it's copyrighted. And so what this is, what I'm showing you is actually the digital copy. It's a digital copyright slider. And so if you Google copyright slider, you're going to come up with this. And what you can do is take a look at the works, when it was published, what year, and it'll tell you whether or not you need permission and what's the copyright status. Okay. Obviously, the kind of a rule of thumb is the author living or died in the last 70 years, or author died more than 70 years ago. Those things are in the public domain. That person no longer has copyright over it. Okay, and so this is the digital slider, and it's librarycopyright.net/digital slider. A great tool to use if you have any questions. Now, what about the things that you create? How do you protect them or let people know that they may reuse them? And there's a couple things. Number one, tell them, put it in writing is the big thing. If you have a website, you want people to use that stuff, use it, reuse it, put it on there. There's also a pretty cool website called Creative Commons, creativecommons.org, which allows you to click on licenses, and you can choose a license. And it asks you as you go through a series of questions. Allow commercial use of your work. I don't want commercial use. No. I don't want people modifying my work. Okay? It's international. You can go through and do this stuff, hit select a license, and it gives you these things right here. And so it tells you cannot use it for commercial use. It'll tell you what what your work contains, what people can do with it. Put that on whatever you're using. It's free. It's a button symbol. Stick it underneath on your works, whatever you need to do with it. You can use it. That tells people that they can use your things either without giving you attributing the work to you, or they can change it, they can sell it, whatever. And so use Creative Commons. It's a pretty neat website. Now, as you go throughout here, when in doubt, ask for permission. That's the basic thing you can do. And one more thing, you may reuse this presentation as long as you give me some credit. And also, a lot of the information that you saw here came from either Creative Commons website, the one I showed you there, the copyright site, or the Library of Congress. And so, as you continue to use things in your classroom, and as things start being posted online, you find things online, really all you have to do is go to the bottom a lot of times of pages, and here's this blog right here has the copyright notice on the bottom. I just click on it, and it'll tell me what I can do with this work. Okay, I'm free to share this work, to copy, distribute, and transmit this work under the following conditions. I need to attribute the work to the author. I cannot sell it. and I may not alter, transform, or build upon this work. Okay.